Let's look at how to do arithmetic with complex numbers on the TI graphing calculator. As always, I'm using a TI-84 plus CE, but a lot of this will apply to other Texas Instruments calculators. Now I do have the complex, or the imaginary number I on my calculator. If you look, it is above the decimal sign. So if I hit second and the decimal, that I is specifically the imaginary number I. So let's say I am taking two complex numbers and I am subtracting them. Now, as a reminder for students, I always put parentheses in when I write the problem. So if I have parentheses here, I want to have parentheses on my calculator as well. So parentheses, 4 plus, again I hit second and the decimal, oops, I forgot my 3. Go back in, let's type in 3, I, in parentheses. Again, remember it's subtraction, not minus. Again, this number is for negatives. So then 5 minus 7, second. And I've got it typed in correctly. And you'll notice my calculator does give me an imaginary number as my answer, where it will put the real part first and the imaginary part second with the I. So I do expect that. I can do this with multiplication and division as well. I can even square. Let's say I want to take 4 plus 3i and square it. I can type that in. So 4 plus 3i, and then let's hit my square button, and my calculator will square it for me. Let's say I'm multiplying together complex conjugates. Now, complex conjugates, the sign out front is the same, but the sign in the middle is opposite. So these two are complex conjugates. And as I type these in, so 4 plus 3i, and you'll notice I don't need the times sign. I can just put those parentheses. Again, if there is no operation, my calculator is going to interpret it as multiplication. So 4 minus 3i, there's my complex conjugates. And I do just get 25. If we remember, when we multiply complex conjugates, we do not expect to get an I in our answer, and that is indeed the case of how we got it. Let's say I want to type in division. Now, I can type that in with my special fraction. If I hit alpha, y equals, I get my little submenu here, and I'm going to pick that first option. So 4 plus 3i on top. I didn't put parentheses, so I'm not going to put them here. And then 5 minus 7i on the bottom. Now, sometimes my calculator will interpret this correctly, but sometimes the calculator has issues. Now, I've got a new calculator, and it tends to do things correctly. This is the correct answer, and you'll notice we do have fractions for each of those, which are fractions in lowest terms. So this is exactly the answer we expect. But sometimes my older calculators, especially if the numbers are bigger and trickier, doesn't necessarily work. So if you're ever having trouble with this, type it in without that special fraction key with division. The note of caution, though, is I will need to put parentheses around the numerator. I will also need to put parentheses around my denominator, because otherwise my calculator is just going to put 3i on the top and 5 on the bottom. So let's type it in like that. Divide it by 5 minus 7i. Now, because I didn't use my special fraction key, my calculator is, as a default, giving this to me as decimals, which are horrible. But again, I can fix that. If I go to my math menu, I'm going to pick arrow frac. And again, that will take a fraction and turn it into a decimal if it can. And I do now get the same answer I got a moment ago. So this does involve a little bit more care, but again, some of the older calculators, particularly if the numbers are not working out nicely, you might have to enter it like this instead. It all just depends on what type of calculator you've got. We can also do i's to powers. Let's say I want to do I to the power of 675. As we hopefully remember, there's only 4 options. It's either going to be I, negative I, 1, or a positive 1. So let's type that into my calculator. Let's pick up I and use my little caret button here for the exponent. so 675, and hit enter. Now you'll notice I got a really hideous looking answer. If I did a smaller one, let's just do I to say the 63rd power, my calculator did that one just fine. But for the nastier exponents, my calculator is sometimes going to give me an answer that looks like this. If you see that capital E, that is shorthand scientific notation. So I've got capital E negative 11, and then the I like that. So what this means is 4.2 times 10 to the negative 11th, and then I've still got that minus I. You can see that capital E here, it's written as EE, but if I do type that, it will show up as just a single E. So again, that is shorthand scientific notation. And if we remember, that is 4.2 times 10 to the negative. So that is 0.0000000000042. So it's not quite 0, but it's pretty darn close. And what I'm going to do is interpret it as 0. I always tell my students, my calculator can't actually do math. We think it can do math. What it's doing, particularly for problems like this, is it's doing an approximation technique. And sometimes, for the smaller numbers, it does it just fine. But as I get to bigger numbers, it doesn't approximate it correctly, and I get a weird answer. So again, I am going to interpret any of those capital E's as 0. So I got 0 minus I. Well, that's the same as negative I. What if I type in 6 to the 676 power? I want to make sure I hit all of the options here. So again, I'm getting a hideous number. I've got 1 plus 4.76e negative 11i. So again, that hideous number I'm going to interpret as 0. So I'm interpreting this as 1 plus 0i. Well, 0 times I is 0, so that's just a 1. Now I tell my students, be careful where that number is. Sometimes it'll be the real part. Sometimes, as we saw here, it'll be the imaginary part. And then the other thing to be very careful of is where are our pluses and negatives. Again, my only options are I and negative I, and 1 and negative 1. So obviously I need to be very careful for this previous one. Was that a minus I or a plus I? Because if I put a plus here instead, I'd get a totally different answer. The last thing I'd like to look at is taking square roots of negative numbers. Now the square root of negative 4, let's type in second that square button to get my square root. And again, this is a negative, so let's use my negative sign there. If I type that in, my calculator is going to give me an error message. As a default, this is the calculator setting. I don't want to get imaginary numbers, and so it's telling me my answer is not real. But you can change your settings so that your calculator will do that. I'm going to come here to the mode button, which is right next to the second button. And we've got a whole lot of options. The one I'm going to focus on is way down here. I've currently got real selected. I'm going to come over here to where it says A plus BI and hit enter. What I've done is I've now put my calculator into complex mode. So let's hit second mode to quit. You'll notice it says quit above mode, so that's how I get back to my main menu. And once again, let's type in the square root of negative 4. And this time my calculator will correctly tell me it's 2i. So again, we do have no imaginaries as a default, particularly for those lower levels. We don't want to confuse students that don't deal with i's, but we can change to this mode if we need to have it. Let's say I want to do negative square root of 8 times negative square root of 8. Well, I'm in imaginary mode. My calculator should be able to do this. So let's type in the square root of negative 8. Let's hit right to get out of the square root, and then put another. Again, my calculator knows this is multiplication. I don't have to tell it. And let's hit enter. My calculator will do this correctly. If we remember by hand, we will get I squared, which is negative 1. So yes, I should get a negative answer. So again, as I always tell my students, if you type it in correctly, have it look exactly the same as we have it written by hand, the calculator should give me a correct answer. Let's do one more with division. Let's do the square root of -32 over the square root of 2. Now, again, it's division, so I'm going to go ahead and use my little special menu here to get that division up. And let's type in the square root of -32 on top, and then the square root of +2 on the bottom. And my calculator, again, is giving me the correct answer of 4i. Now, once again, particularly with these harder problems, some calculators have issues if you try to use that fraction key. So if you're having trouble, you can type it in. It's just -32, and then hit the division sign like this. Again, for the easier problems, the newer calculators do that just fine, but if the numbers get nastier, or if you have an older calculator, you might sometimes have to just type it in as division.